for this offer, it didn't fit, but she was just trying to appeal to everyone. So she's thrown in the kitchen sink. And she was getting that advice from people who don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want coaching from people who don't know what they're talking about.
Hey, Launch family, before today's episode, I have a small favor to ask you. We realize not everyone who's watching our show is subscribed to the channel. So if you've ever learned anything valuable from our conversations, or if you felt inspired by one of our guests, can you do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button? It helps grow the show more than you know. And the bigger the show gets, the bigger our guests will get. Thank you. And here's today's Dare to Launch.
Hello, Launch family. My name is Chris. Welcome to Dare to Launch. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Jeff Walker.
Hey, everybody.
And also our other co-host, Mr. Dan Walker.
Hey.
And I wanted to talk to the two of you today. We have an upcoming launch intensive that I know you're getting excited, getting prepped. You're working hard on it. We had one a few months ago too. So I thought it might be interesting for people who might be listening to this, thinking about going, could you give a little bit of the takeaways from the last launch intensive, or some kind of key, crucial, important things that people might learn from this upcoming one? So yeah, what are some takeaways from this launch intensive?
Well, it was just awesome. Just to start with. I mean, it's super cool because we got to be with just a small group of people, and they were so inspirational. They're just doing such cool work. And it was a broad spectrum. It was a lot of some people that had big businesses, big launches, doing big things. And some people that just maybe they'd been doing great work with individual clients, and they helped people, but now they wanted to get their work out to a bigger audience, to a broader audience, to get all the launch life that we like to talk about. And so in just every kind of market you could imagine from all over the world, anytime you get in a room like that, it's just super inspiring.
And to just spend that sort of time in that kind of energy. Like, so just to really quick, just give an idea of what this was. This was a small group. We had about 40 people in the room. It was Jeff, it was myself, it was Justin on our campaign design team. And it was 2 days where we just dove deep into building launch. Like, we guided everybody through building a launch the way that we build launches, the way that Jeff has built launches for, what is it now? Like 22 consecutive $1 million+ launches. There's so much of the I don't know what you would say, like the standard rules for building a launch and the standard format that you might follow for building a launch. But it's like, how do you actually do it? What sort of processes do you follow? How do you know that you're building a good launch along the way? How does that strategy come out? How do you decide? How do you make all those millions of little micro decisions along the way that can be the difference between a launch that absolutely crushes it and a launch that just kind of flops, but you don't really know why? So that's what we did for these couple days. Is we guided everybody through the same questions that we asked them, the same questions we'd ask ourselves, and the same processes that we follow while building a launch. And it was fun. It's super creative work, and it was fun to be able to dive into that process with these folks where, we got to know everybody's name. We got to know what they were working on. We got to have ideas specifically for them and to dive into the unique challenges that came up for their markets or who they're serving or their level of experience in business. And yeah, it was just a really cool event. But I think what we found is that there were not that many, you could say, individual sort of challenges or sticking points. And there were a lot of universal ones that came up. I don't know. Would you say that's fair, Jeff?
Yeah. And some of them were surprising. And for me, after 20 years of teaching people how to launch, some of them were actually counterintuitive and were like a little mind blowing for me. And I think that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. I figure we'd dive into some of those spots so that the places where we saw a lot of folks get stuck, whether they either came into the intensive with a lot of them, I would say probably the majority of them came in with something they'd already launched before. And whether it went well or it didn't do well, they came in with specific areas they were looking to get some work done on. And then there were the folks who were planning their launch for the first time, mostly all not brand new first launch ever, mostly a first launch for a new product or something. But there were a lot of similarities, a lot of things we found, like that there were certain spots that kept sticking people. And so we thought, hey, that would make for a cool episode, right? To talk through some of those spots that we found that a lot of people tend to get stuck on.
Well, now that kind of the dust is settled after all of that thinking of and executing on the launch intensive, what are some of those strategies or ideas that are still with you and still, or maybe surprised you, as you mentioned, Jeff?
So there's one phrase that came to me while we were there, and I'm probably going to end up creating an entire training just on this one thing. But it was this idea of becoming magical. And I know that sounds weird, but this idea where you want to be, this is a business where you want to attract your people. You want to be attractive. And when I'm talking about being attractive, I'm not talking about your physical appearance. I'm just talking about someone that attracts attention from the right people in the right way. And so much of that comes down to how you present your material, how you present the content in your pre-launch, about creating charisma. And we all know that there are people that have charisma, like just that are just like, we're like, wow, that person's cool. That person's powerful. That person, I want to be around them. Other people want to be around them. And I will tell you that I have never considered myself as a naturally charismatic person. But over the years, evidently, we've had 1 million people go through our free training. So at some point, somehow I figure out how to attract some people. Mm-hmm. And as we're in this lunch intensive, I'm like, that person has so many of the right ingredients, but they need to become magical. And then we started to work on that stuff within the workshop.
Yeah, this is the stuff that I just thought this was such a cool thing when we dove into, because it's how you make yourself unique. It's how you set yourself apart. Justin, who is one of the, it's 3 of us up in front of the room leading these workshops. It's myself, it's Jeff, it's Justin. And Justin's, coincidentally, those are the 3 people that plan our launches. And Justin's phrase for this is becoming a category of one. And I think this is one of those things that I see Jeff has done just unbelievably well. I think it's one of the things that he's absolutely world class at. I think it's one of the reasons that he built the business that he did, right? Because think about it, it's like, it's how you set yourself apart from the competition. Whatever you're doing right now, whether you're teaching something, you're offering something, whatever it is, there's no way you're the only person doing it. And honestly, even if you were the only person doing it, that's still probably not a good thing. Because if you're the only person in the world selling what you're selling, it probably means that there's not that many people all that interested in it. But whatever you're doing, there's going to be competitors. There's going to be other people who are marketing things very similar to yours. So how do you set yourself apart? Jeff is not the only person in the world who is teaching people how to build an online business. And there's no way that he could even speak about it like he was. So he could take the approach of, trying to differentiate what makes him different than the competitors and stuff. And in my opinion, what that would end up doing is just bring more attention to those competitors. But you notice that Jeff never does that. In fact, I think I've heard you say, Jeff, that you don't really even think about other competitors or what they're doing or really paying all that much attention to that. And the thing is, because even though Jeff's not the only person in the world teaching how to build a business online, he's the only person teaching how to build a business like Jeff Walker. He's the only person teaching how to build a business the way Jeff Walker's done. He's the only person teaching a business or teaching how to have the business and have the life that Jeff Walker has. And that's so powerful, because there are people who look at Jeff and they look at who he is. They look at the business he has, the way that he shares his life and the things that matter to him, and how he's built this business that supports the things that he wants to do in his life. And they say, yeah, I want to do that. And when Jeff talks about how he was not a natural salesman and how he developed this launching process originally so that he could have a business where he's selling things without having to be a salesman. And there's people who are like saying like, wow, Yeah, I get that. I feel like that too. I also want to do that. They resonate with him and they want to do things like he has. So, of course, that then who are they going to look to when they're looking for how to build their business? Well, they're going to look to Jeff Walker. He's now in a category of one. There's nobody else who is anywhere close to as qualified to teach how to grow a business the way that Jeff does as Jeff. It it doesn't necessarily eliminate competition, but it does put you in that category of one.
What's coming up for me as you guys talk about this is, where does kind of fear come into this for people? Because when you talk about creating a category of one where you are, in a sense, your own, there's not as much competition there because you're creating something that people say love, right? And maybe some people also don't like it. So you might also create some things like, okay, people who don't resonate with Jeff, they don't go to Jeff, but then there's some people who love Jeff, right? And versus people putting something out where it's really just fostering indifference, which I think is the death of most businesses, right? Is when you just put out something and it causes no reaction. There's indifference towards the offers or what you're creating. To me, the idea of putting something out there that really is just like, is me, right? Or is part of what I bring to the table, like that causes fear and requires bravery, I think, in that. So can you talk a little bit about that process? Does that come up for people in the launch intensive when you ask them to really do that?
Yeah, I think it comes up through. I think people dilute themselves and they dilute their offer and they dilute their marketing because of it, and they're like you said, Chris. If you're teaching how to build a business like Jeff Walker, then you are going to turn off people who do not want to build a business like Jeff Walker. It's what happens for sure. And you know what? The majority of people in the world are in that second category. Like the majority of people in the world are not necessarily going to want to be you, to do it how you did it, to do it how you do it. And that's fine. You don't need that many people. I mean, if you get 1/100th of a single percent of the world's population interested, that is still hundreds of thousands of people. But what happens is that so many people, they see all those people who might get turned off by it and they get scared. And they think, well, those are people who are leaving because I'm not speaking enough to what they want. So they try to speak to what this person wants, this person, this person, this person. They try to give so many different options. They try to speak to everybody, and it just ends up being really dull. And you don't actually grab anybody. You don't actually get anybody who's like all that passionate because it just sounds so freaking generic.
Yeah, Chris, that's a great question. And I have a bunch of thoughts about this. First of all, you know, bouncing off of what Dan just shared, we had someone at the intensive who was like, they were looking at their offer and, they had a great offer, but then they had this piece about AI. It was like, how to use AI to do this thing that he was coaching on. And we're like, why is that there? And she's like, well, because AI seems like the hot thing. And someone told me I should put in AI. Someone told her that she should put AI into this offer, even though it was just this complete non sequitur. It just that didn't fit with the offer in any way, shape, or form. In fact, it sort of was counter what her entire offer was about. And it's like, first of all, you're trying to appeal to everyone by throwing in everything into this offer. And we could talk about offers because we spent a lot of time on offers at the intensive. So that was wrong because just trying to appeal to everyone with this AI thing. I'm not speaking about AI because for some listeners, absolutely you want to have a piece about AI. But for this offer, it didn't fit. But she was just trying to appeal to everyone. So she's thrown in the kitchen sink. And she was getting that advice from people who don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want coaching from people who don't know what they're talking about. And we saw that like with another person at the intensive. They're like, my friends just like looked at her body of work and said, well, you can just get all of that by listening to some podcast. And again, the people that don't know what they're talking about will give you bad advice. It's like, sure, if someone wants to go listen to 50 podcasts, maybe they could get this broad range of knowledge, but there will always be people that pay for expert knowledge that is codified and put into a framework. And that's framework is a key word that we kept coming back to in the intensive, because it's at the end of the day, all knowledge is out there. Like, Dan was just talking about me and how to grow an online business and how to do launches. And, there are plenty of videos on YouTube that can tell you about building an online business. Are they competition for me? No, they're not. Do I care about that? No, I don't. And that's how we saw that again and again with people at the intensive. It's about creating that great offer that shares your framework that you've put the time and effort into codifying and assembling and distilling your teaching, training, coaching knowledge into something that creates real value. And that's the magic in the launch and the launch intensive, frankly.
That makes so much sense.
That's how to. I love that you talk about framework. I'd love to dive a little bit more into that, actually, because I think that is such a key thing that we talk about in the intensive. Because really, at the end of the day, if you're selling knowledge, if you're selling how to do something, you are in a way you're not almost selling the knowledge itself, because the knowledge is out there. Like, you could, like, that's the beauty of the world we live in right now, right? Like, you could go on YouTube and you could probably collect all of the actual knowledge you need. But the problem is, like, then what do you do with it? How do you apply it? How do you use it all cohesively to achieve a goal? And that's the thing I think people are in the knowledge business are really selling these days. They're selling their framework. They're selling their approach. They're selling the way that they collected all this knowledge and said, here's the knowledge here's the things that's important. Here's the things that are not important. Here's the stuff that's super duper mega important. And here's how you make sure that you do all the right things. And here's the order that you do them in. And here's all the things that are going to come up along the way that you have to avoid. It's the knowledge plus the experience plus the application of that knowledge. Like, all that comes together into the framework. And once you start to position what you're teaching like that, that's when you can start to really become that category of one, because your approach to applying this knowledge is going to be different than everybody else out there. And so if you can show, like, here are the ways that this is what I've been able to achieve through my framework, this is what I've been able to help other people achieve through my framework, then you're going to be able to speak to people who want to approach things the way that you do, who like that framework. And I just think at the end of the day, that's what you're truly selling. It's not just the information, but it's that framework that you've built around it.
That is so wise when I'm hearing you say that, because to me it's like it's not just the framework is sort of the efficiency of transmitting that information, if that makes sense, right? Because, like, you're right, we could find a lot of knowledge if we wanted to go hunt it all down in a library and read it. You could probably find it there, but that's maybe the longest way possible to find all the information that you need to, say, start a business. Whereas when you put it into the framework, what you're promising is that not only is all the knowledge been distilled down, but it's going to be transmitted and transferred to you in a really efficient manner where you can apply it. And it's you can listen to thousands of podcasts, but then you have to create the framework out of that. And that's the work. That's actually why it doesn't necessarily work to just do it based on, free information. But I love what you're saying there around the framework, because it's about transmitting the information that actually makes people want to pay for that, the efficiency of it.
And, I think that's part of why events like this launch intensive are so cool, and why there is still, actually, I was going to say, why there's still such a market for them, even in a world where information is so easy to access. But honestly, I think that would be incorrect to say. I think it's why there is a growing need and a growing desire for these sort of events, because it's when you get in person with somebody who can help guide you through their framework, that's the times in which someone can say, like, oh, like, have you ever been doing something that you really thought you understood, and you really thought that you were getting there. But for some reason, the results just weren't coming. Just something wasn't happening. And then, someone came along, you asked for help from someone, and they just were able to just point out, like, no, you're not doing everything wrong. You're just doing that one tiny little thing slightly wrong. You just misinterpreted that one piece of information. Tweak that. And then suddenly, like, it was like the whole world opened up. Like, I know I've seen this a lot. I love to do a lot of sports and activities involving motion and speed and moving fast, whether that's mountain biking or skiing or driving cars. And it's, there's so much of that you can unlock just by having someone say, like, hey, you ever tweak that one little thing? I don't know. I think that's a bit of a tangent, but I think that's one of the really cool things that we found out of this sort of in-person live event is that it's that application of the knowledge part that can be just so subtle, but it can be so powerful and can save just a ridiculous amount of time.
So Dan, can we go back to this idea of the framework and specifically how it relates to when you get deep into your pre-launch and how it leads into your open cart?
This is one that we saw a lot of people get really tripped up on. We saw a lot of people who they were very, very comfortable with, they're actually very comfortable with making their offer. They were comfortable with talking about their program. They're passionate. They really believed in what they had. They'd had great success stories. They're happy sharing those success stories. And they were really happy talking about the program and how it was going to be this transformative thing for people. And similarly, we found that when they were talking about when they were doing their free content, in their PLC 1 and their PLC 2, the first 2/3 of their launch sequence, they were also pretty darn comfortable. They're pretty comfortable with, teaching for free and sharing value and inspiring people and really leading people towards that solution. Found people were really comfortable there too. But man, PLC 3 is where things got sticky. That was where, people were really struggling. We saw people, they jumped way too fast. They jumped straight from sharing free content. Like, hey, if you have this problem, I have here's the solutions, and walking through just walking through their free launch content, no problem. And then suddenly in PLC 3, it shifted to, and when you buy my course and this, and it felt weird, right? It felt abrupt. It felt, usually people got a little awkward too, because they weren't really sure how to make that transition. And they just kind of thought that they had to jump straight to talking about their offer right at the end of their launch, and that there was just no natural shift. And, we could just kind of, I was just getting the mental picture. I remember back in one of the earlier versions of PLF, we talk about the BSO meter, and, people say BSO meter is really low, and they're getting the free content, and suddenly it's like, and when you join this, and suddenly it's like, boom, 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 it's like pinging, the BSO meter goes all the way into the red, and people are like, oh my gosh, what is this? It just didn't feel natural. And so we really found that this concept of the framework and teaching the framework in PLC 3 really helped people with this. When people focused on teaching their framework in PLC 3, then it gave a really natural way to still continue to teach people as though they were doing it themselves, right? PLC 1 and 2, you're teaching people how to do whatever your thing is as though they are doing it themselves. And so it's like, well, how do you transition from talking to somebody like they're going to do it themselves with this free information into you're going to guide them through it in exchange for them buying your thing? The answer is in the framework. So you shift from the individual, like, here's how you do it. And then in PLC 3, you lay out the framework. You lay out the entire solution, A to B, all of the different parts in it. You kind of unveil the entire framework. You unveil the entire thing so people can see the full picture, which does two things. One, it shows that it shows the depth of what you've created. And two, it kind of inspires this little bit of a feeling of like, oh gosh, okay, that's kind of a lot, right? And it starts to feel like implementing that framework without you being there to show them how starts to feel like, well, a little, I wouldn't say an impossible task, but kind of. Starts to feel like a pretty monumental task. And then that's the point at which you offer to be their guide. You offer to be involved with them and to walk them through the framework personally. And once we explained it like that, and once people started implementing it like that, and then that transition became not only smooth, but that moment in which they made the offer kind of almost felt like a relief. Like it feels like you're doing people a favor by making the offer.
It's a natural progression instead of it being this awkward transition that I'm like, oh, like I just think about when I was in sales, the asking for the order was always awkward when you were new at sales. And I can imagine that doesn't necessarily go away for someone when they go into the online sales area. It's still an awkward transition of figuring out how to do that smoothly. So, man, I bet you a lot of people would want help with that specific area, right?
Absolutely.
Light bulbs were just clicking off at intensive. It was a really cool moment.
Well, so how can people get to an actual intensive, this one upcoming in June, if they want to get that experience?
Right. So we did the one we did a few months ago in February. And so it was so awesome. We've decided to do a second one. This isn't something we normally do, but we're doing a second one. It's coming up, depending on when you listen to this. It's going to be in June. It's going to be in my hometown, our hometown of Durango, Colorado, which is an amazing place to visit.
There's an upgrade.
Yeah, we should talk about that next episode. That's yeah.
We should. I mean, man, the amount of launches and the amount of like crazy innovations in the online marketing world that have come out of this town, like not just from us, but just from the people who have come in and planned their launches here.
Yeah, that would be a cool episode. Yeah. All right. Well, maybe that'll be what we talk about next. I'll make a note.
So, yep, Launch Intensive coming up. Most of the seats are already full. So if you're interested, I can't wait to see the folks that are going to be joining us. They were so inspirational last time. It's going to be great to get to know everyone. It's at productlaunchformula.com/intensive. productlaunchformula.com/intensive.
And we will link that in the show notes for you down below as well. So you can go and check out all the details there. Plus, we always have goodies in the show notes. So go check them out. Well, Launch family, that's all for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. And we hope this conversation inspires you to dare to launch.
Hey, Launch family, one more thing before you go. You heard us talk about it throughout the episode. It's the Launch Intensive. This is where you get to go into Colorado, Durango, work with Jeff Walker, Dan Walker, and Justine Livingston for 2 days, and you'll leave with a world-class launch plan. Now, this Launch Intensive will sell out quickly, so go to getyouLaunched.com right now to secure your seat. That's getyouLaunched.com. We'll see you on the next episode.